I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Jim Clay, Production Designer on Kenneth Branagh's coming-of-age fable, Belfast. Jim, first of all, talk us through the research that you had to undertake to authentically recreate Belfast in the late 60s.
There's quite a lot of research out there in archive footage because of the Troubles. So I engaged with a lot of that. But a lot of the personal research in terms of, Buddy's life really came through conversations with Ken. He obviously has vivid memories of that period, what was happening, the family life at that time. So that was invaluable to me as a production designer. I felt a sort of resonance with those characters and with that environment because I'd been brought up in the northeast of England, which is similar architecture. Obviously not the Troubles, but similar terraced houses. So that was familiar to me from my grandparents' home. And then we had this brilliant weekend when we, myself, Ken, and Harris Zambalakis, the DOP, we took a trip to Dublin for the weekend, and we just walked the streets. We walked all the patch where Ken used to live. Unfortunately, his exact house doesn't exist anymore, but the streets do, the geography is the same. So we had this brilliant town when we could walk, his journey from home to school through that iron fence across the fields and back again and around the streets, which encompassed his world. So that was terrific.
Wow, that would have been I would expect a really emotional experience. This film has such a personal element to it. What does that mean to you to recreate Ken Branagh's childhood?
Well, it's daunting on one hand, but because we had that time with Ken, it was a direct insight into the world he remembered. And yes, you're right. It was quite emotional at times for him and for us. I think just standing in those real spaces and then knowing we were going to recreate them, at least a version of them, because as Ken says himself, it's pretty autobiographical, but it's part of the real world.
That's right. It's semi-autobiographical.
Yes.
But it's still, I'm just wondering, do you recall his reactions and feedback when he first started seeing the completed sets before production commenced?
Yes, I mean, I think he was thrilled, and he was, constantly saying, "Oh, that net curtain in the window might have been a little bit too fancy for our street, so maybe we change that." And a few details to do with the dressing. He was conversing with our set decorator, Claire Richards, who did a most fantastic job in having the same insight into that world. Ken was particularly interested in, the area outside, what we call the back alley, the backyard of each terrace house, and the dressing in there, which was very personal to him in his memory. And we were against the clock. We'd gone into pre-production. I think it was probably June 2020. We were just emerging from the lockdown, and there was much talk about another lockdown in late autumn. So we had a very finite window in which to make the movie. We had 6 weeks prep and 6 weeks to shoot. So we were going at it full on the whole time.
Yeah, so you're racing against the clock. You're also making sure that you're giving the look of the film, this authentic touch. There's a lot going on here and a lot to unpack that you had to deal with. This was filmed in England, wasn't it? Was it Surrey that it was filmed?
Strangely enough, it was filmed in Surrey, yes. As I said, we were just coming out of lockdown. So a lot of movies which had been in production were caught into a hiatus. So they were frozen, productions on stages, in offices, in the normal sort of venues where we would make the movie. So none of that was available to us. So we opted fairly quickly for what was an empty school. It had been a school building in Surrey, just outside London. And so we moved into that building as a production headquarters. It also provided for us some of the interiors, pub interior, the hospital interior, those things. And then we embarked on building this street, ironically, at the end of the runway of Farnborough Airport, which is an odd choice, I admit. But again, It was a little bit as a result of COVID, because this was a big exhibition space with a big car park, which normally would have been full, but just happened because of the circumstances to be standing empty. And it was, I think, 15 minutes drive from our production headquarters. So it kind of fitted in terms of the speed at which we had to operate.
Wow. See, I may say, I thought the film might have been done in a studio or maybe in pre-existing locations, but a lot of this was constructed from the ground up, wasn't it?
It was. The street itself and the interiors of the houses were entirely constructed. You know, probably normally we would have gone on to locations for this sort of scale of movie, but again, this was a new socially distanced world, so those locations weren't available to us either. But also, it's a little bit of a sort of methodology that Ken and Harris like to operate under, which is to build as much as possible composite sets, so they have control over lighting, action, schedule. So that's very much their working style. I hadn't really imagined on this scale of movie that we'd be able to do that, but amazingly we did manage to do it. And I have to pay tribute as well, actually, Rob, to the construction team who built that street and the interiors in such record time. This was a construction manager called John Bowen from with Palace Scenery, a team I've worked with for many, many years. And without their quality of work, you know, making it real, we would fail, because it was so vital to the story that that was a believable street and believable interiors.
I really hope that audiences understand the effort that's gone into the look and feel of this film, because you take it for granted, you know, it's just, you think, oh, well, they plonk themselves in some pre-existing Irish town and here we go. But this is really exceptional work from the ground up. I wonder then, given your role as the head of department, how's the balance between focusing on visual aesthetic as opposed to ensuring the physical spaces inhabited by the characters are also practical? So you've got to balance that out. You've got to get cameras in there, you've got to get cast and crew, but you also want it to look as real as possible. So is that thought process going through your head quite often?
Absolutely, constantly. It is, you know, it's a fine balance between the two. And often, you know, the job of production designers, our work should be invisible. People should believe that's a real place. So I think we succeed most when people don't think we've been there, which is a good thing, frustrating as well, but it's a good thing. And then it is the balance about, you know, I think the job is to create the sort of psychological climate for the story, but at the same time facilitate, you know, Harris's camera moves. And we talked a lot, the three of us, about those shots, and I think they were always strongly framed and dramatically framed. So Harris and I worked a lot at being able to facilitate that in the physical construction of the set.
Yeah, I noticed quite a few beautiful shots that Harris constructed alongside your design aesthetic, where there's a lot of geometry. You know, the buildings come in where we focus in on, say, Jamie Dornan's character. A lot of that is so intentional. And I mean, you just touched on it, but I just wonder, that is a whole area of production design that many of us lay people just have no idea about. Can you talk us through a bit more about constructing angles and scenes with the DP to make sure that you are kind of propelling the story forward in a way that maybe might be slightly subliminal?
Yeah, I mean, we have the advantage. I've been fortunate to work with Ken and Harris on the last 4 or 5 movies. So, you know, an inevitable shorthand has developed, because I now am very familiar with their style of working, their style of shooting, because Ken and Harris go back many, many years together, working together. So that helps enormously. And I know that Harris wants to get there, right in there. For example, you know, the shots looking down the staircase and up the staircase, we built that in a way that we could just get a flat out at the top of the landing, so that we could get the camera crew just at the top of that staircase looking down. And similarly in the rooms, they weren't exactly open plan, because that wasn't the style of terraced housing in those days. But we did a room divider between the two, and we facilitated, being able to see from one room to the next and out to the kitchen. And then, of course, all the way through, a key element for the shooting was to build the back alley at the back of the two interiors. Ma and Pa's and the parents' house, Buddy's house, was actually built in the car park at the school I mentioned. And that was because we needed to use borrowed light, real light. So we built those two as a composite set with a tiny bit of the street. We built a tent over to cover and protect it from the elements, but we took the front and the back of the tent away so that the natural light was just as it would have been in a terrace house, because as you know, there are windows at the front and a window at the back, and then that leads on to the back alley.
Mm. Wow. I was also thinking as I was watching the film that it's obviously in black and white, and what additional considerations go into production design when a film is shot in black and white? Can you talk us through that aspect?
Yeah, I think it's really about contrast values, so that, we were building the set and painting it in the normal colors. But I had to be sure that if I'm painting a door a particular color or a wall a particular color, and then the window frame or the door frame a different color, you just wanted to make sure that the contrast values were quite strong, so that I was looking all the time at the sort of black, gray, mid-gray and white values. And that was a discussion I had with Harris. We picked some colors and we did a bit of test shooting on that in black and white to make sure we had the right palette.
Yeah. So it's not limiting at all? Like, it's just another challenge that you just take on?
No, I don't think it is limiting. I think it's powerful. I mean, Harris and I love, and Ken does as well, shooting in black and white. Some of the other movies, we've had little sequences where we shot in black and white, but I think it's such a strong and emotional way to shoot. And of course, it helps the period element hugely.
Yeah, it does. And because I just noticed, if you don't think this through carefully, a lot of these surfaces and spaces kind of start to blend in, I would expect, together, and you wouldn't get the same kind of contrast value, and therefore you wouldn't feel like you're there. It'd feel very setty, and I just think, that's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I sometimes think, John Bone, the construction manager, and I, and his fantastic plaster and paint team, I sometimes think we spent, 30 years trying to make walls look like walls.
Yeah.
But it's important, because if those walls don't look like walls, if that brickwork in the back alley doesn't look like brickwork, it's a set and you don't believe the illusion.
There's a couple of specific aspects of the film that I just wanted to quickly discuss. One of them is Mr. Singh's shop. That brought back a lot of memories for people, no matter where they lived, in that 1960s aesthetic, when you'd go down the store and you'd bring a shilling or something and buy, a chocolate bar. And I just am curious, although you're recreating Ken's childhood, was any of that aspect coming from your own childhood?
Most certainly, yeah. I used to visit my grandma and grandpa in a street called Craven Street in Middlesbrough in northeast Yorkshire, and there was a very shop right at the end of their road, which was Mr. Singhs, really. And I always remember at Christmas they would do a little display in the window of Christmas tree and fairy lights and toys for kids for Christmas, and it was an absolute pull, a magnetic attraction for every time we visited. My sister and I visited my grandparents, so that was a very, very strong memory.
And then, of course, when the street starts to really erupt in violence, you've got barricades at the end of the street that look like they're from World War II, World War One. I forgot a lot of that, what was going on during the Troubles. I was a bit young, but I still recall seeing it on the news. It brought back some memories even for myself. I can't imagine what it would bring back for people who lived there or lived in the UK and were so close to it. And so when recreating that, were you really only just turning to archival footage, or was this stuff also in the back, the recesses of your brain?
Well, I think it was archive footage, to be honest, and it was Ken's memory of it very strongly. But I'd also, as a young designer, worked in Belfast in the sort of, I guess, late 70s or early 80s, when the Troubles were still continuing. I did a Mike Leigh film there, And so I did have a memory of those streets at that time. So that was still strong in my memory. But, you know, the extraordinary thing is that they were living in those circumstances, but somehow they did their best to normalize life as much as possible. And I think one of my favorite scenes is the street party, when you know, the record player comes out and the sofa comes out and everybody's singing and dancing on the street. And yet, you know, at the end of it, Ma shouts out to one of the soldiers, you know, give us a hand to take the sofa back inside, as if it was the most normal thing in the world to do. And these two soldiers, I mean, it was just the most beautiful bit of direction, that, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Like, without you know, making a huge generalization, the Irish people that I know are so resilient and just get on with it. And I love that part of the film. I'm so glad you raised that particular scene. It's just a very quick one, but it really gives you so much insight into what Ken would have thought about his ma, his, you know, who he put on a pedestal. Which brings me to this, actually. The film has resonated with a lot of people across the world, no matter where you're from. This story can be quite universal if you look at it that way. Also, it reminds us of our own families, our own parents that we adore, put on pedestals. I'm wondering what the film actually means to you personally. Although it's Ken's story, it is a more universal story. So what does it mean to you?
It is, to me. I think that, you know, the script resonated, as I said, as soon as I read it. And I think for anybody who's ever had to leave home for work or whatever circumstances, it resonates with them. But mostly for me, I think there's a point in your life when you, if you're lucky, you can sit back and comfortably look back and really appreciate and acknowledge those who've nurtured us and brought us up and influenced us. And I think that's the message that a lot of people got, and it was certainly a powerful message for me.
Yeah, absolutely. My final question is, you know, you've won many awards over the years, including a BAFTA for Children of Men, which to me is just one of the greatest films ever made. And you just received a nomination from the Critics' Choice. So I just always wonder, what do awards and accolades mean to you? Do you hold them dearly to your heart? Does it help you get more jobs? What does it mean to you?
Well, I think it's meant to get you more jobs. Whether it really does or not, I'm not sure. But you know, it's obviously recognition from your peers and from the business is hugely heartwarming and welcome, because it just means your work is being noticed. Although our job is to be invisible, as I said, as a body of work builds up, then I think you feel, well, that was worthwhile.
Yeah, it's always nice to have your work noticed and have a pat on the back. And on that note, Jim, I wanted to say thank you for your time. Congratulations on Belfast and good luck this award season.
My pleasure, Rob.